order to surround the island, deny entrance or people leaving, cut them off, and do like an old school castle siege. The other possibility is what they call the fifth column, and that would be Chinese sleeper agents within Taiwan activating and then carrying out, what looks like a revolution locally on the ground. More than likely, what I've been talking about with experts here is to be a combination of all three. If the Chinese Communist Party were to attack Taiwan, very likely they would make a blockade. They would use the fifth column to launch internal attacks, and then during the chaos of that, only then have the invasion force come. The issue with all that, though, is that it would create a window of time for foreign response. Japan has said, at the very least, they've suggested that Taiwan is also in the strategic interest of Japan, because a war for Taiwan would very likely include their, region as well. They would intervene. Possibility of Philippines intervening, and because Japan is, of course, allied with the United States in the, the defensive agreement between India, Japan, the U.S., and Australia, that would very quickly draw in the rest of the countries. India, especially having, of course, ground war access to China, would present a real problem. And so, as long as the U.S. stands by Taiwan, even with the U.S. is getting pulled into multiple wars, this could still be far too risky for the CCP. But, again, they're saying it, so we'll see.
Josh, you mentioned earlier that China tried very hard to intervene with the election. I just want to mention that in Taiwan's elections, voters are required to personally go to designated polling stations and use paper ballots. Taiwan doesn't allow absentee, early proxy, or electronic voting. The ballots are counted by designated individuals, and each ballot is displayed before counting for public supervision. I just wonder, is there something that the U.S. can learn from Taiwan's elections?
Well, it's more of a shift in policy from Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. Taiwan hasn't changed its stance, really. Taiwan was trying to engage with China, even at Tsai Ing-wen. Taiwan was making an effort to engage with them. The CCP was rejecting it. The big difference now is that, of course, China, the Chinese Communist Party, in the last several years has become much more aggressive. Xi Jinping is walking the footsteps of Mao Zedong, and given the current situation with Xi, the trade war with the United States, and of course the issue with semiconductors and U.S. sanctions on China regarding that, the Chinese Communist Party is getting pushed into a very desperate area. They need to demonstrate their strength. And Xi Jinping, with his effort of national rejuvenation, trying to reinvigorate the Communist Party, there are some risks that he might actually try something.
Candidate is saying Taiwan is a country, that is a act of separatism, and that because of that they're pushing up the alternate option, the KMT, and maybe even the TPP, the third party. I was also recently in South Korea and did a special feature on the CCP's hidden hand. That special feature is free for everybody to watch. That was my, again, investigative feature from South Korea. I'm working on some more stuff. That is right now for everybody on Epic TV. You do not need to be a subscriber to watch the special feature on the CCP's hidden hand. Let me show you the trailer of that, then we'll jump over.
The Chinese Communist Party uses bribery, blackmail, economic threats, and outright subversion to quietly seize control of other nations. While the CCP threatens to invade Taiwan using military force, well, the communist regime is already invading other nations, only it's not being done with troops and bombs. Instead, it's being done with non-military tactics. And South Korea has been an active target of the Chinese Communist Party in this lesser-known form of war.
Speaking about the Communist Party's agenda to take Taiwan and how the Taiwanese elections are a big part of this, let me show you just a few headlines of what has actually been taking place. CNN notes that Taiwan is facing a flood of disinformation from China ahead of a crucial election, and they note here's how it's fighting back. I know that in the U.S., when we hear disinformation or misinformation, it's sometimes just an underhanded way of saying political censorship. But here in Taiwan, there is actual proven CCP disinformation. The CCP propping up even fake YouTube channels and so on They're very actively doing this in the very real sense. The Economist says that China is stoking a controversy in order to influence Taiwan's elections. The Economist said China is flooding Taiwan with disinformation. The thinking is this. Now imagine you're a country and you want to conquer another country. What does it look like if you conquer another country? Right? What does that actually entail? It means that you control their politics. It means you control their economy. It means you control, depending on how totalitarian you want to be, control the media. And you essentially control the main systems that make the whole country work. If you want to conquer a country using non-military means, what do you do then? You find ways to gain control over the politicians. You find ways to gain control over the unions. You find ways to gain control over the academics and influencers, the journalists. And you find ways to gain control over the businesses. If you do that, you control politics, you control the economy, and you control the civil society. That's all for tonight. Thank you for being here, and as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, stay free.
Influence the Chinese government, why are we allowing it here? If we can't influence Chinese schools, why can they do it here? If we can't access the Chinese internet and influence their people through social media, why can they do it here? So you have to understand, why are we allowing that? Why are we allowing it as American citizens, each American citizen, and why are we allowing our lawmakers to allow it to happen? It needs to end, and the violation for that needs to be treason. There needs to be complete ban, federal law, and if you violate the federal ban and federal law, then it's treason, because we're talking about national security now.
Casey Fleming, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Taiwan is gearing up for its presidential election this Saturday. The favorite candidate is
but the passive money is still flowing. Net, we actually saw an exodus of capital in the fourth quarter of last year. And I don't know what it is so far this year, we're only about 8 days in. But that is pretty spectacular and a spectacular reversal to see a net capital outflow. Imagine if you were a U.S. venture capital firm with money in Chinese venture capital. Good luck ever getting that money out, especially given the new paradigm that we're investing under today with the increased economic and geopolitical belligerence of the Communist Party. So I think the losses will change those capital flows forever. But I do think that this requires leadership, Jan, right? This is, again, I jokingly say at our firm that if U.S. national security was left up.
Previous administration's progress in securing our nation's border is an understatement. It's also an understatement to say that I was horrified to see this administration, under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership, begin to erase this and Santos and programs meant to secure our borders.
Drugs have also been a major problem in Oklahoma, where Attorney General Gentner Drummond said the medical marijuana industry has been overtaken by criminal enterprise run and the impeachment inquiries against the Secretary Mayorkas and President Joe Biden. Republican lawmakers added on Monday new impeachment threats against the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. And Representative James Comer threatened to impeach Attorney General Merrick Garland if he fails to charge Hunter Biden. James Madison High School in Brooklyn, New York.
Europe, they just desperately wanted a peace deal. Well, we all want peace, and yet appeasing dictators has never worked, and it's not going to work now, and that's where we are. So I guess this is a long way of saying conflict will continue to increase. The gap between the wealthy and the poor continues to widen because of inflation. It's the insidious thing that disproportionately affects the poor and the middle class, and that creates friction and conflict. And all that's going to do is fuel the geopolitical fire that was already smoldering.
Well, Kyle Bass, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Glad to be here, Jan. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thanks.
That's as Vice President William Lai won the island's high-profile presidential election with over 40% of the vote. The new president-elect has been known for his staunch defense of the island's sovereignty, something Beijing considers a red line. The new president-elect has been in politics for decades. Throughout his career, Lai has become known for his outspoken rhetoric. He was once considered even tougher against China than President Tsai Ing-wen, who he served with as vice president. In his speech last year, he insisted that Taiwan is already independent. Therefore, there is no need to declare it.
The pragmatic acceptance that Taiwan is already a sovereign, independent country, and there is no need to separately declare Taiwan independent. Taiwan and China are not subordinate to each other, and only Taiwan's 23 million people can decide their future.
That view draws anger from China. Back in August, Beijing called him a, quote, troublemaker. That's in response to his brief but official stop in the U.S. on his way to Paraguay. The South American nation is one of only 13 countries that still maintains formal ties with Taiwan. Taipei threw the remark back at Beijing, responding that China is the real troublemaker, pointing to its standoff this month with the Philippines and its continued military harassment of Taiwan. Although known for his hawkish attitude towards China, Lai appears to be taking a more subtle approach since starting his election preparation. Just days ago, Lai pledged that he would keep Taiwan's status quo if he was elected.
We should strengthen our own strength and unite and cooperate to ensure peace.
Lai pledged during his campaign that he'll stick to President Tsai's path. That means staying open to the possibility of talks with China and maintaining peace and the status quo. At the same time, pledging to defend the island and reiterating that only its people can decide Taiwan's future. Here's a look at her stance at an earlier campaign rally for Lai.
I want to ask you all here, does anyone want war? Nobody wants war. Do we want peace? Everyone wants peace. Look at Hong Kong and think of Taiwan. We don't want Hong Kong-style peace. We want dignified peace. Everyone, am I right?
Beijing enacted a national security law on the city of Hong Kong in 2020. Since then, critics have pointed to a fast-paced erosion of democratic freedoms in the former British colony. That's despite the promise of Hong Kong's autonomy for at least 50 years under a one-country, two-systems framework. When it was handed back to Chinese rule in 1997, China made the same offer to Taiwan, but the island staunchly denies Chinese sovereignty. Taiwan's foreign minister has said the island has kept a close eye on Beijing's attempts to sway the election. Last week, he revealed the ministry would publish its findings soon after voting day. Ahead of that report, here's a look back on the Chinese Communist Party's alleged influence efforts. So how does the self-governed island protect its elections? The answer, vote in person. Prior to the election, registered voters will receive a notice telling them where to cast their ballots within their own district. Each person carries a special stamp that is unique to themselves, just like the number. Those who forget to bring it to the poll sites can replace it with a signature or a fingerprint. Unlike the United States, there are no mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, proxy voting, or electronic voting. And all ballots are counted by hand. The process is open to the public. Coming up, a crucial question.
The New York governor's way in terms of moving the state forward to impose a quarantine should someone feel the need to do that. Republicans, meantime, say this is a calamitous decision that is equivalent to government reach. Now to discuss this is attorney Bob Senator Cox. It's good of you to join us this hour. What is your chief concern about this updated ruling, if you will, that poses so much of a to living in the state?
Yes, well, the problem here is that this regulation that the governor and her Department of Health issued, which was struck down last year by a trial court judge here in New York State, was found unconstitutional, but the governor and the attorney general appealed, and as you said, an appellate court just overturned that decision from last year and threw out our case on the basis of standing. So now this means that the governor and her Department of Health are free to reissue this regulation, which has zero due process protections built into it, and basically allows the Department of Health to pick and choose which New Yorkers they can lock up or lock down. They don't have to prove you're sick. They don't have to prove you were exposed to a communicable disease. They can lock you up or lock you down in your home, or they can remove you from your home with the force of police and put you into a detention facility of their choosing. Once you're in there, there's no process for you to get out. The regulation says absolutely nothing about how you get out of quarantine once you're put in there. And, you know, there's absolutely no age restrictions either. So they can do this to you. So they
Probably
can also
do it
this
right
to your
around
child or
election
your
time.
grandchild or your elderly parent.
November.
It's a totalitarian regulation. There's no due process in here. It doesn't even say that you have the right to an attorney until after you're locked up or after you're locked down. And it conflicts with our existing New York State law. We already have a quarantine law, which we've had since 1953. And that law is full of due process protections. So this ruling now allows the Department of Health the ability to reissue this regulation, which is terrible. It conflicts with our Constitution. It conflicts with our existing quarantine law for 70 years that we've had in New York. And it really gives a power to the Department of Health that they are not entitled to have.
What caused this? What caused the state and the governor to reach out to do this? Because you have fought this case before, and you saved millions of New Yorkers suffering from the probable effects of illegal forced quarantines by what many people have called the state government tyrannical.
Yes, absolutely. You know, the original court struck this down in July of 2022. And then we saw Governor Hochul and Attorney General Letitia James come back after the 2022 elections, when they both won re-election. And in 2023, they filed an appeal to get that decision overturned. So they knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted this power back, and they fought for it in the appellate court. Now, the court, as you mentioned, issued their ruling just before Thanksgiving. They did not rule on the merits of the case. They did not say that the regulation was constitutional. What they did was they said that they were going to throw the case out because they didn't feel that my plaintiffs had standing. They didn't feel that they had the right to sue and bring this lawsuit in the first place, which is very wrong. My plaintiffs absolutely have standing. I'm representing a group of New York State legislators, Senator George Borrello, Assemblyman Chris Teague, Congressman Mike Lawler, and a citizens group called Uniting New York State. They have standing absolutely without question. In fact, the lower court judge didn't even address standing. He wrote a 14-page decision, very well written, very thought out when he struck down this regulation a year and a half ago. And he didn't even mention at all the standing issue because he didn't feel it was even an issue. It's not. Clearly, the executive branch of government has overstepped, and the legislative branch has the right to go to court and sue the executive branch when they feel that the executive branch has taken a power that is reserved for the legislature. So we do feel it's an incorrect decision, and we are planning to appeal this case to the highest court in New York State.
Bobby, I'd like you to stay with me. I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk to you more about what this case or what this ruling does to the people living in New York City. You mentioned it.
It really only depends on how much they feel confident in escalating. They're already destabilizing the region wherever they're able to, and we didn't even mention the nuclear program. So it really, the Iranian accusation that will cause instability, I think it should be dismissed. The real question is, what do we do to convince them or to actually put them on the defensive so that they get scared and they
On that note, President Biden is calling these airstrikes defensive, while Iran is saying the U.S. will pay. Where do you see all of this going?
Well, I think he annuls the value of the airstrikes by, first of all, having warned the Houthis hours, if not a day in advance, so that they removed all the valuable personnel and equipment. Number one. Number two, I think that this apologetic attitude toward the strike and then the promise that we don't need to escalate calms the Houthis and calms the Iranians, which is the last thing you want to do. You want them to feel like they have crossed some lines and that they should be scared. And if they're scared, they'll back off and they'll start recalibrating their strategy. So I think on some level, our statements following the attack and the way we behaved before the attack, unfortunately, annul the value of the attack.
In terms of the U.S., President Biden's move to order these strikes has come under fire from both parties. Several Democrats are calling the move unconstitutional because Biden did not first seek Congress's approval. What's your understanding of this?
Well, the U.S. Constitution makes it very clear two things. One is the president's in charge of our defense, and more importantly, if there's an acute defense need, even the War Powers Act of the 1970s doesn't annul that or doesn't overpower that. The second thing is I mentioned the Constitution because in it says we need to maintain a Navy, raise an Army, but maintain a Navy. So it's constitutionally mandated to have a Navy. And the reason for that is because it was a core interest or a core value of the United States is freedom of the seas, freedom of navigation. And because our country was built on trade, where it was surrounded by seas. So freedom of the seas is an absolute, even enshrined in the Constitution, essentially. So this is a standing mission of our armed forces for 200-some years. And it doesn't need the war powers to protect our right to pass through vital sea lanes. The second thing is 20% of the world's trade goes through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait and Suez Canal. And this was shutting it down. It has shut it down. So this was a vital interest. So this was an act of self-defense, almost an acute act of self-defense that doesn't really require the War Powers Act.
So was President Biden's call the right one in this case?
I believe it was, because we're not declaring war on Yemen. We are declaring that we are trying to keep the straits open. As long as it's that, then I think he's within the constitutional rights to do this. If he expands the war and makes it an ongoing campaign against Yemen, then it gets into a more dicey territory.
David Wormser, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
عمل داعش كردیان برانبر خشکو دایکانی ازدیما کاری که دو بود لهمو چمک دموکراسی و موافقانی مرور و انسانیت او بارو بخیر که استهایل به طایبت لعراق و سوریه بشه که دگره برابرا و حالانه که ایداره اوباما که
خفت روش منذ وداعش اسكت دامبوم كراقوتيني زقيديا بما مشكل بحر في ذا نبو باوان رحمنا قدامنا سؤالان نجد الباوان نستم بس وانا بس ناش بجواش بان.
They would literally auction in front of soldiers, and then the soldiers begin to pay.
زارورا نجيب في حملي زارورا الدنيا سيوان هنجيب
وحشی گریتی توا عیاره ظلمی که جار بود جاره لما فتنه که و تعدایی که زور جریان دیده که همانا روزانه دست فروشیده
Satanic Temple. This is a non-theistic religion that was officially registered with the U.S. government about 10 years ago and is now recognized as a tax-exempt religious organization with the IRS. And just as a fun fact, they have their headquarters based out of Salem, Massachusetts, of all places. And this quote-unquote religion, despite its name being Satanism, claims to not truly believe that Satan exists. Instead, according to Ms. Shalise Blythe, who is the Satanic Temple spokesperson for reproductive rights, she claims that the temple treats Satan as something akin to a mascot who represents rebellion, personal sovereignty, as well as resistance. Now, if this view of theirs reminds you of that very famous quote from Charles Baudelaire, that Satan's greatest trick was persuading the world that he doesn't exist. Well, perhaps the members of this temple got tricked the hardest of all. Regardless, in advancing one of their main tenets, which is complete personal liberation, the Satanic Temple created something called the Satanic Abortion Ritual. This was the ritual that we just read about in the pages of Cosmo magazine, and the reason for its creation appears to be so that the Satanic Temple can give women a religious loophole to conduct abortions. Because if a woman happens to live in a state here in America where abortions are either partially or completely outlawed, well, she can now claim affiliation with the temple and make the argument this abortion of hers is actually part of her religion. Now, the Satanic Temple organization set up their first online abortion clinic over in the state of New Mexico. They chose New Mexico for several different reasons. Firstly, they already had a fairly large contingent of members in the state, about 3,300 members. And second of all, New Mexico was the easiest state to set up this clinic because it's considered an abortion rights stronghold. New Mexico has no laws dictating time limits on abortions. There's no age restrictions. There's no waiting periods. And perhaps most important of all, it's legal to prescribe abortion pills to someone remotely and then have those pills mailed to their homes as long as they live within the borders of the state. They named this online quote-unquote clinic Sam Alito's Mom's Satanic Abortion Clinic as a reference to Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito, who is both a devout Catholic as well as the author of the Supreme Court opinion which ultimately overturned Roe versus Wade. And so this online clinic allows anyone living within the borders of New Mexico who's over the age of 17 to conduct a virtual chat and then to order their abortion pills directly to their doorstep via the internet. Now, for legal purposes, the only real requirement is that the quote-unquote client must admit to having an interest in performing a satanic abortion in order to be considered a practicing member of the religion and therefore to receive this legal loophole and the benefits that it entails. But here's the thing. As I mentioned earlier, New Mexico already has some of the most lenient abortion laws in the whole country. And so this satanic abortion clinic is not really legally necessary for the people living in that state. Instead, this New Mexico location is more like a proof of concept, a concept that the Satanic Temple is working to expand to the rest of the country. In fact, along that line, the Satanic Temple has now filed lawsuits against the states of Indiana, Idaho, Missouri, as well as Texas, arguing that those states' abortion laws violate the rights of Satanic Temple members. Essentially, the Satanic Temple is using several of the recent Supreme Court rulings in favor of
going to hell in a handbasket.
Christian baker's right to not bake a cake for a gay couple. They're using these precedents to make the argument that these laws, quote, restricting members' access to abortion infringes on their religious right to participate in our satanic abortion ritual. However, in a
Tackled a spike in the use of nitazines. The rebels have bombed military facilities used by Houthi rebels in Yemen in a coordinated action with the US Air Force. The Ministry of Defense said the strikes were limited, necessary and proportionate, and in self-defense. The aim was to degrade Houthi capabilities and protect global shipping.
UK and US forces have bombed military facilities used by the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The Ministry of Defense said 4 Royal Air Force Typhoon fighters struck 2 Houthi facilities involved in their targeting of HMS Diamond and US Navy vessels on Tuesday. Armed had no plan.
Last night's fortunate series sent of warships to defend shipping and Red Sea blockade.
The strikes on Thursday night were the first to be launched against the Houthi militants started targeting international key trade routes. Air at sites in operate from Australia, Bahrain, Canada, and the Netherlands. Houthi played down concerns about the danger of escalation after criticism from Russia, which requested an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council on the strikes.
Clearly, there is nervousness amongst those partners in the region that there could be some sort of escalation. Confidence, limited, proportionate, necessary strikes that went in last night were what was necessary to disrupt the Houthis' ability to attack our warships that are protecting shipping in the southern Red Sea.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer expressed support for the action, but called for the Prime Minister to make a statement to Parliament at the first opportunity. The head was fighter in the strikes and 6 were wounded. The spokesperson said the attacks would not go without retaliation, and the group will continue to target ships headed for Israel. The Iran-backed force claimed their attacks on Israel-linked shipping in the Red Sea were in response to the country's bombardment of Gaza since Hamas's assault on Israel in October.
Nitazines are powerful synthetic opioids recently linked to dozens of deaths in the UK. They are being increasingly found in black market pharmaceutical drugs, as well as being cut into illegal drug supplies. In the following special report, NTD's Malcolm Hudson brings us a closer look at what they are and the dangers they pose.
Nitazines are a group of synthetic opioids hundreds of times stronger than heroin. They've been increasingly found cut into black market drug supplies. Recently, I spoke to a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, Jeffrey Singer, who explained they were originally tested as a painkiller.
Back in the 1950s, the Swiss pharmaceutical company Ciba created a nitazene with the hopes of bringing a new painkiller to the market, but it was never approved and they never brought it to market, and it sort of faded from a lot of people's consciousness.
Nitazene wasn't approved because of the dangerous effect on respiration. In recent years, they've resurfaced and become popularized in the black market. They are similar to fentanyl, but far stronger. Side effects can include slow breathing, respiratory failure, skin turning blue or grey, and death. Singer said their chemical makeup makes them far more deadly.
Based on its chemical makeup, there are literally too many to count variations on the nitazene you could make. So you can make so many different variations. And since they've never been brought to the market, we don't know. They've never been subjected to clinical trials. Some of these nitazenes may be many times more potent than fentanyl.
Fentanyl can kill an adult if only 2 milligrams are consumed. That's less than the weight of a small mosquito. But the nitazene variation, isotretinoin, can be fatal if an even smaller amount comes in contact with skin or is inhaled. Some variations can be 10 to 20 times stronger than fentanyl and hundreds of times stronger than heroin. Singer said nitazenes are showing up in toxicology reports across Europe and North America.
It's starting to appear much more frequently now in the UK. Seems to also be adulterating black market benzodiazepines like Xanax that some people like to buy on a black market.
Other reports show nitazenes have been found in methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and ketamine. In a drug bust towards the end of last year, the Met Police recovered around 150,000 tablets of nitazenes. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
And to learn more about the spread of nitazenes in the UK, NTD's Malcolm Hudson spoke to the coordinator of the Ireland Drug Watch, Michael Lionel.
Hi Michael, so the nitazene drug family is a growing problem in the UK, with the Metropolitan Police having seized 150,000 nitazene tablets in a drug bust towards the end of last year. How much is it being used in the UK?
At the moment, there doesn't appear to be much of it. I mean, there are always the odd people who buy things on the internet that they're kind of interested in, but generally speaking, there isn't a market for nitazenes in the UK. What this is concerns has been to streaming to other drugs that are commonly used by this aging cohort of heroin and crackers that are benzodiazepines.
Are they imported?
I mean, the drugs that have never been issued commercially, they were rather like the legal high situation we had, 10 or so years ago. These were kind of patterns that were never developed commercially because they were considered too dangerous. They're synthetic opioids. The information that we have is that they're being produced in China. The reasons why nitazenes have come about is largely to do with Chinese legislation rather than UK legislation, in that because of the huge amount of deaths with fentanyl in the United States, that Chinese legislation now has clamped down on that. So as an alternative that's not covered by Chinese legislation, we're getting a reduction of all these nitazenes, which are imported into the UK. Usually, people buying them online.
And how are they affecting people? They're entering the black market drug supply, and people, as I understand it, aren't often purposefully seeking them out. So how are they affecting people?
Well, nitazenes are far more potent, even than fentanyl. So they're far more potent than heroin. So they're active at tiny little doses. The kind of issue that we're finding is that in the UK at the moment there are kind of sporadic out.
Thousand Americans have died from poison or opioid. FBI director, the warning lights are now blinking. This is why we should fire Secretary Mayorkas today and give Joe Biden the message that he's next. Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas paid a visit to the southern border on Monday. He called on Congress to alleviate the tremendous stress on the immigration and under-resourced facility. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Under resourced.
The CES Tech Show in Las Vegas is underway, and a range of companies are showing off their latest products. There's something for everyone, especially car lovers. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the details on the new vehicles on display.
Mercedes-Benz unveiled its concept CLA-class electric vehicle at CES in Las Vegas on Tuesday. The new ride features an AI-powered dashboard. This technology provides context-based suggestions and talks with users.
In the new CLA that is coming out next year, we are then launching a new virtual assistant, which is generative AI based, and it's there to create a more empathic and intuitive way to communicate with your vehicle.
Another German automaker is showcasing the concept of remote-controlled valet parking. The BMW iX allows the driver to leave the vehicle at a specific drop-off and pickup point. BMW says the underlying technology can also be used as an autonomous driving system.
There are quite a few use cases. We mentioned valet parking before, but you can think of other use cases. You can think of business-to-business use cases. It could be applied at plants, assembly plants. It could be applied for rental cars. It could be applied for car-sharing vehicles.
Technology expert Nicole Scott is taking the new car for a spin.
It feels weird. I have to admit I'm a bit nervous. But it's interesting to see the different perspectives, because this one feels very fast, but the side angle shows I'm actually driving very slowly.
BMW isn't the only car company offering remote control. Honda is teaming up with Sony for the latest version of its electric car with AI capabilities. The duo hopes to lead the software transformation of the car industry.
Sony Honda Mobility is one of our key initiatives to achieve this, and Honda is fully supporting it. We believe that there is a unique chemical reaction when Sony and Honda collaborate.
Jessica Hawk from Microsoft spoke on stage about Sony Honda Mobility's AI assistant.
So what's interesting and promising today is that with the introduction of generative AI and cloud-scaled computing, there is unlimited potential to amplify creativity, increase personalization, and transform the in-vehicle experience.
Honda also unveiled its new EV lineup. The Japanese car giant presented the Honda Zero Series with 2 concept models. The automaker also debuted a new H logo exclusively for the new EV models.
This new H-Mark expresses our corporate attitude of going beyond our origin and constantly pursuing new challenges and advancement.
CES runs in Las Vegas until Friday, January 12th. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
The World Economic Forum names AI misinformation as the world's largest short-term threat. Members of the forum spoke on the new Global Risks Report in London today. Europe's risk management leader says AI models can even influence elections.
The potential impact on elections worldwide over the next 2 years is significant, and that could lead to elected governments' legitimacy being put in question. And this, in turn, could, of course, threaten democratic processes, lead to further social polarization, riots, strikes, or even intrastate violence.
Today's Global Risks Report comes ahead of this year's Davos Forum, a gathering of political, business, and technology leaders.
The forum says that another big global concern is climate change. Its report states extreme weather as the second most pressing short-term risk after misinformation.
And NASA's goal